Chapter 8. "I thought you said she was fast," yelled Gaius to the chief engineer. Another volley of cannonballs whirred from the pirates as they turned to intercept them. "She is," he yelled as he kept to his station, waiting for Captain Featherton's orders. "But they must have hit one of the masts below deck with their first volley, crippling her. Very efficient battle tactic." Gaius looked across the railing again and saw the dark ship loom closer. He was surprised by how clearly he could see the pirate crew standing on deck, waiting for their moment to board and attack. It seemed from their posture that they had no intention to sink the Dragon Diamond, but instead to overtake and capture her. It would mean fighting at close quarters, and that every hand aboard must clap sword or pistol to achieve victory, or at the very least to survive. "Prepare to be boarded," ordered Captain Featherton, as she drew forth her cutlass and a pistol. "All men to battle stations." "Jest," thought Gaius. "I have to protect Jest." With a leap and a bound, Gaius crossed the deck, completely ignoring the roar of cannons from beneath his feet as the Dragon Diamond returned fire against the enemy. He quickly gained the door to the cabin and barged in. Jest was nowhere to be found. "Jest!" cried Gaius. Percy gave a high-pitched chirp that pierced the air. No response. "Stars curse him," mumbled Gaius under his breath. He had to find him. Mom would kill him if anything should happen, and he would never forgive himself for allowing him to come on such a dangerous voyage. Leaving the cabin, Gaius searched below deck first, hoping to find him safely hiding with Miss Hensley. But the lower decks reeked with chaos. Each level housed gun crews busy loading and firing cannonballs at the enemy. Lieutenants shouted orders and smoke enveloped everything. Gaius continued shouting out Jest's name, but to no avail. He could hardly even hear himself over the commotion, let alone his little brother. After weaving through the madness of the lower decks, Gaius decided to go through the trap doors at the bottom of the ship that led to the masts below. Jest was an idiot after all, and maybe he was just stupid enough to wander to the most dangerous place aboard, even when weather was fair and no pirates were attacking. But as he approached the ladder running down the trap door and seeing nothing but empty sky beneath him, Gaius paused. "You'll need this," yelled a member of the crew, handing Gaius a long length of rope. The crewman made a gesture around his waist, indicating that Gaius should wrap it around himself to prevent himself from falling overboard, or in this case, just falling to his death. "Thanks," yelled back Gaius, as he tied a knot in the rope and began to climb down. It was amazing how much comfort a simple rope could give him as he descended to the masts. In retrospect, and upon further reflection, once the battle was over, Gaius realized that had he fallen, the rope would most likely only kill him faster by breaking his back or destroying his stomach once he reached its end. But such thoughts were absent from his mind as he scanned the mass below for his idiotic brother. Immediately he saw that the chief engineer had been correct. The tip of one of the masts had been severely damaged, and the sails dependent upon it were no longer in service. The loss of sails meant slower speeds, which equally meant that they were inevitably going to be boarded. There! He finally caught sight of Jest. There he was, halfway down one of the main masts, standing on a small platform. And he was fighting? At least he had a long rifle in his hands, and he seemed to be shooting in the general direction of the enemy vessel. Wait! Gaius recognized that rifle. It was one of the clockwork rifles he had made for the Gabion gang. But not just any rifle. A clockwork sniper rifle with a scope. Around him was a small group of young men cheering him on. Percy flew ahead of him, alerting Jest to his presence. "Jest!" yelled Gaius as he finally made his way down the mast to the platform. Another rumbling of cannon fire, but no hits. "Over here!" yelled back Jest with glee. "I never knew fighting could be such fun." "What are you talking about?" said Gaius. "The real fighting hasn't even started yet." One of the crewmen stepped forward and pointed at the pirate ship. "I don't know what you count as real fighting, but me and me mates have just witnessed a miracle. Jest here has single-handedly taken out 5 pirates in as many minutes, and with this incredible piece of art he holds in his hands." Jest shrugged his shoulders in humility. Gaius was not pleased. As he landed on the platform next to Jest and the other crewmen, he adjusted the rope around his waist and asked, "How did you get your hands on that rifle, Jest? And how did you manage to sneak it onto the ship?" "Well, after we went to bed last night, I couldn't sleep, so I got up and explored your lab. It's an amazing place, you know that? And when I saw this little beauty, well, I figured if we were going on an adventure, I'd better come prepared." "Yes, but how did you sneak it on without my noticing?" "Like this," he said, as he pushed a small lever on the side of the rifle, and the barrel folded inward on a hinged mechanism. "Oh, right," thought Gaius. "I forgot I made one of those." "But it should be incredibly inaccurate with the hinged barrel," said Gaius. "I tested it, and the prototype you're holding doesn't shoot straight." "Well," said Jest as he took aim with it once again, "you just have to adjust for the inaccuracy. Once I figured out how far off it was from the scope, I compensated. He fired. "He hit another one!" cried one of the crewmen. The others went crazy. As angry as Gaius was at Jess for stealing a rifle and joining the fight without his knowledge, Gaius couldn't help but be a little proud of his little brother. "I suppose having a sharpshooter on board does have its perks," said Gaius, rubbing the palm of his hand on Jess's head between the horns. "Just be careful when we get into close combat, and stay close to me." With those words, Gaius unveiled his own little secret. He had crafted 2 identical clockwork pistols for himself, capable of firing 12 shots each in automatic succession. Another gun model not destined for the Gabian gang. He had very much enjoyed testing them. A target dummy in his lab met an untimely demise after facing down their barrels, and he had named them How and Why, his 2 favorite questions. "Whoa, you're just full of surprises." Jess was obviously impressed. "Between the 2 of us, we can handle anything." "I hope you boys are right," said the same crewman as before, "because this is where the fight will be the heaviest, and we are to be fighting together. And if we are to be fighting together as shipmates, I'd like to introduce myself. Mr. Waters, at your service." "A pleasure," said Gaius, "and I am Lord Q of Portunus at yours, and you already know Jest, of course." And he cocked his head at what Mr. Waters had said before. "I always thought the deck would be where the main fighting would happen." "Oh no," said Mr. Waters. "That's what happens on the sea. 2 ships get next to each other, and one boards the other horizontally. But in the air, it's more about protecting your balloon than anything else. No balloon, no air, no altitude. Thankfully, we started at a higher altitude, and by maintaining that position, it makes it harder for the enemy to wreck our balloon. The captain will do everything in her power to make sure we stay above the enemy. That way we have a better chance of popping their balloon and winning the day. And if we stay above them, then—" At this, Mr. Waters gestured for Gaius to finish the thought. "Then our masts become the front line of defense," said Gaius. "Exactly," continued Mr. Waters. "Even now the pirates are beginning to climb the outside of their balloon to get a footing on top. It's a dangerous maneuver, but they might just try to attack us from below. If they do, it's up to us to prevent them from getting through the trap doors above and gaining access to the top deck." "Why don't they just bolt the trap doors?" said Gaius. "They probably just did," said Mr. Waters. Gaius's heart sank. It meant that they were trapped under the ship until the fighting was over, or they were dead, whichever came first. No retreating now. "Right," said Mr. Waters, who was clearly more than just a crewman and was most likely a ranking officer. "Just keep picking off that enemy as you see fit. You're a natural, lad. Don't stop. Now, Lord Q, I see you've got your fancy pistols, but those will only be good at short range. How much combat experience do you have exactly?" "Exactly?" said Gaius. "Exactly none, I'm afraid. This will be my first, and How's and Why's as well." "How's and Why's what?" asked Mr. Waters, obviously confused. "I don't have a what," said Gaius, also obviously confused. "Just a how and a why." Mr. Waters waved a dismissive hand. "Whatever. Just place yourself next to Jest and protect him from anyone who gets near. He may be skilled at a distance, but a long rifle is of very little use when the fighting is close." "Aye, aye," said Gaius, giving what he thought was a smart salute. "No, just no," said Mr. Waters, shaking his head. "We're not the Navy. We don't do that here." Gaius dropped his shoulders in disappointment. The pirate ship was slowly rising toward them from below, like a bloated white leviathan crashing to the surface. Mr. Waters was correct. A myriad of fearsome figures stood on top, in sharp contrast to the pale balloon upon which they rode, waiting for their opportunity for revenge against Jest and his deadly accuracy, which had already claimed many of their crewmates. Gaius readied How and Why, spinning their clockwork mechanism with a whirring sound that filled him with confidence despite his fear. The other crewmen readied their weapons as well. Some were on the same platform as Gaius and Jest. Many others were scattered amongst other platforms on other masts, creating an entire network of defense to rebuke the oncoming storm. And on it came. Faster than Gaius had thought possible, the pirate ship accelerated toward them, their balloon filling his entire vision. The top of the balloon nestled itself right alongside the downward-pointing masts, careful not to puncture itself against their tips. Soon grappling hooks flew across the gap, giving the enemy a clear route of attack. Gaius fired a few rounds right into the side of the pale white balloon of the pirate ship, hoping to open a few holes and leak their air. "Don't waste your bullets," roared Mr. Waters as he unsheathed a wicked saw-blade-looking cutlass from his thick belt. "Bullet holes are too small to leak any meaningful amount of air from the balloon, but bullet holes are great for leaking blood." Gaius nodded and trained his sights on the incoming wave of pirates. He could make them out individually now. Fierce they seemed to him, bloodthirsty and itching for a fight. For a split second he couldn't believe he was actually in the midst of something like this. Sure, he had packed his pistols as an extra measure of security for the adventure ahead, but he hadn't actually planned on using them, except as a last resort. And now here he was, standing next to his brother, preparing to fight for his life. The pirates yelled out a battle cry from their side of the grappling hooks, still standing on their balloon. Gaius, Jest, and the entire Dragon Diamond responded with an equally guttural yell, daring them to come aboard. Even Percy let out a terrifying little screech after from Gaius's shoulder. Then, in unison, the enemy swung across the gap between the ships and landed on various platforms of the Dragon Diamond, swords and pistols at the ready. Gaius did exactly as Mr. Waters had instructed. He leaked blood. He protected Jest. 2 pirates came swinging directly toward his platform, and why and how questioned their decision to do so. Why would you swing directly at a masked mastermind wielding such powerful new weaponry? How could you possibly be so stupid? Both fell. With no enemy successfully landing on their platform, Jest was free to continue picking off pirates at a distance, making it more difficult for the second wave to get organized for another swing across the gap on their grappling hook lines. Gaius found it difficult to wait. Now that he was in the fight, he wanted to keep moving, keep firing, keep something. Anything but waiting for the next wave. But the next wave did come. This time 4 pirates tried to land on the platform. Gaius successfully stopped 2 of them with how and why, as he had done before, but the other 2 landed right next to him. Jest fired his rifle at one of them, but the experienced pirate hit the barrel of his rifle at the last second with his sword, wasting the shot. But Jest wasted no time in responding. Without even trying to get a second shot in, he bull-rushed the pirate, using the rifle as a shield against his sword. Like a billy goat headbutting an opponent off the mountain, Jest managed to push the pirate over the edge of the platform to fall to his death. Gaius was struggling with the remaining pirate. Every time he tried to shoot him, the pirate would use his dual knives to knock the barrels away. Gaius didn't know the first thing about hand-to-hand combat and found himself reacting more out of reflex than any actual plan. But reflex was no match for experience, and the pirate was easily gaining the upper hand. Then a lucky blow. The pirate landed a cut across Gaius's mask. Not knowing the mask to be made of doomstrill metal, the pirate probably thought he could cut right through to Gaius's skull. But the blow deflected the knife completely, catching the pirate off guard and giving Gaius the opportunity to hit him with an uppercut, the top of Howe breaking the pirate's jaw in an audible crunch. The pirate collapsed onto the platform like a rag doll. Gaius and Jest looked at each other and smiled, not at the carnage or the terrible violence around them. They smiled that they were both still alive, sweaty, exhausted, and visibly shaken, but alive nonetheless. In that short reprieve, they looked at the other platforms to gauge how the rest of the battle was going. Only one platform had been captured by the enemy, but Mr. Waters was already leading a counteroffensive to retake it. Jest shouldered his rifle and looked through the scope of the captured platform. 5 pirates are defending it, he reported to Gaius. 2 more are swinging in. No wonder they're not pushing the attack on our platform anymore. They're trying to push their advantage on the one they've already taken. Without saying another word, Jest fired a shot, and Gaius watched as another pirate fell through the air. He looked back at Jest with both a sense of amazement and horror. Amazement that his kid brother had this hidden talent all this time and never knew it existed. Horror that his kid brother was capable of killing another person. He trembled at the thought. Soon Mr. Waters and his team had managed to repel the attackers from the platform. A victorious cry could be heard around the masts. Gaius didn't understand what it meant until he saw the pale white balloon of the pirate ship begin to sink in the sky. At first he thought the Dragon Diamond had scored some remarkable cannon shot against the enemy balloon, causing it to sink from view. But quickly he realized that the only blow scored was to the enemy morale, and they were retreating in shame and defeat, licking their wounds. The tiny prey they had thought to overtake proved to be more than they could handle. Gaius and Jest joined in the victory shout, and so did Percy. Mr. Waters rappelled down his lifeline toward their platform, landing neatly beside them as if he had flown there like a bird on the wing. "Well done, Master Jest," he shouted with a grin, taking Jest's hand in his and shaking it wildly. "I'm not sure we could have done it without you. Well done indeed. No new recruit any more. A battle-hardened veteran you are now. Stars be praised. And you," he said, turning to Gaius, "those pistols are mighty handy in a pinch. And you said you made them? Any chance of getting more for the rest of the crew? No? Ah, well then, we'll just have to make do with having Master Jest and Lord Q on our side for the time being. That we will." Once back on deck, Gaius and Jest were handed wooden mugs filled with a foul-smelling alcohol called Balloc. The entire crew had a mug in hand, waiting for Captain Featherton to make the victory toast. She stepped to the rail of the bridge. her high, clear voice piercing the evening twilight as she looked out over her beloved crew, a wide smile on her red lips. "Mr. Waters," she cried, "status report. How many injured?" "10, Captain," he shouted back. "How many fallen?" A pause. "None, Captain." A wild cheer went up. "How many captured?" Another dramatic pause. "None, Captain." Another cheer. "And how many dead?" The longest pause of all. "None, Captain." The cheer was deafening. Gaius and Jess laughed at the sheer joy of it all. "Very good," said Captain Featherton in a still, quiet voice that demanded all aboard to be silent, and silent they were. Only the creaky sound of the wood ship rocking beneath the silver balloon could be heard in the gap of absolute silence. Miss Hensley handed the captain a crystal goblet filled with Balloc. She took it and held it aloft. "We are the Dragon Diamond," she said softly but surely. "We are hard as dragon scales." "And strong as diamond," went up the reply from the entire crew, as if with a single voice. With that everyone drained their cups of Balloc. Gaius and Jess shrugged at each other and did the same. Gaius felt the liquid hit the back of his throat with a vengeance, like someone had slammed a hot poker into his neck. But he managed to get it all down without gagging, and that was a relief. A strange warmth came over him, and he felt very much at ease. Jest, on the other hand, was less fortunate. As soon as the Balloc entered his mouth, he spewed it back out again and began coughing uncontrollably. Apparently the crew had been patiently watching for such a reaction, and immediately fell into laughter at his demise. "Hold!" shouted Mr. Waters above the laughter. "Hold, I say! Be silent, the lot of you!" He took Jest in his powerful arms and lifted him to his feet. "This young man, Mr. Jest by name, is the hero of the battle. Never afore have I seen such marksmanship. Why, 8 and 20 pirates met their rider at the end of his rifle, mark my words." Jest looked over at Gaius and shook his head at the exaggerated figure, causing Gaius to laugh silently behind his mask. "A toast for Mr. Jest, the hero of Journey's first battle." "With what shall we toast?" asked Captain Featherton, who looked amused by the entire display. "Not Balloc," shouted Jest, to which everyone laughed and Mr. Waters clapped him on the back. "A round of water for all hands," shouted Mr. Waters. "I'm afraid there's not enough of you to go around, Mr. Waters," said Captain Featherton, to some mixed laughs and boos from the crew depending on their sense of humor. Water was brought all around, and all drank in honor of Jest's triumph. Gaius looked over at Jest after the toast, and saw him staring off across the ship toward the bridge, more specifically to where Miss Hensley stood next to the captain. Gaius followed his gaze, and immediately found himself looking at Captain Featherton. Her wavy auburn hair flitted in the twilight breeze, revealing the beautiful neck that supported her even more beautiful face. Her hazel eyes smiled above her rosy cheeks and red lips, betraying a deep intelligence and quick wit. Even though he wore a mask, he quickly looked away before she could feel his stare. Dwyer. The chief engineer's name was Elmer Dwyer. It took Gaius an entire week to realize he didn't know the man's name and just kept referring to him as Chief. Even after learning his name, Gaius found it was much easier just to keep calling him Chief. He looked like a chief, felt like a chief, and in Gaius's mind his face was now synonymous with chief. Plus, Dwyer hated being called Chief. So, Chief it was. "Chief!" yelled out Gaius as he crossed the mess hall. Dwyer was sitting by himself at one of the small wooden tables. His plate from the galley was still steaming with fresh fish and some potatoes. He rolled his eyes at the nickname, but raised a hand in greeting nonetheless. "Q," he said, dropping the formal lord. Most of the crew had done the same. Gaius sat down across from Dwyer. Jest was busy training in sword fighting with Mr. Waters up on deck, and Percy was with him. Now was a prime opportunity to resume the negotiations the chief had mentioned before they had been attacked by pirates. "Chief," he started as Dwyer downed a portion of his potatoes, "are you still interested in purchasing Percy?" Gaius found that being blunt often worked better than finesse. Most folks could smell sweet talk and would immediately become suspicious. Being blunt could lower their guard a little, make them think and feel more impulsive. "No food today, Q?" asked Dwyer, looking at the empty place in front of Gaius. He was obviously stalling, collecting his wits and not letting Gaius surprise him in the conversation. Not a very efficient use of time. Most folks at least know that they can eat and talk at relatively the same time. "I eat alone," said Gaius. Because of his desire to keep wearing his mask and protecting his identity, Gaius would only eat in his quarters behind closed doors where none could see him. Sometimes he would eat with Jest. Most times it was simply him and his thoughts. "Uh-huh," said Dwyer. He looked deep into Gaius's mask as if he could make out the Dowler's eyes, which would have been impossible. It still made Gaius nervous. "Yes," said Dwyer firmly. "I am interested." "Glad to hear it," said Gaius. "You see, you're not the only interested party aboard. Captain Featherton, for example. Like you, she made me an offer almost as soon as she met Percy." That seemed to trouble Dwyer. "You are efficient," he finally said. Gaius took this as an incredible compliment. "I'll shoot you straight," said Gaius. "I'm not looking for ink in this deal." He leaned in close to Dwyer and whispered in his left ear, "I'm looking for an unbound Codex and 3 wordsmiths willing to bind a commoner." Dwyer's eyes went wide. Gaius gave him a stern look so as not to speak too loudly once he swallowed his bit of fish. "From now on, we'll refer to my payment as simply that, the payment," explained Gaius. The last thing he wanted was someone from the crew to overhear them and turn them in to the authorities on Bastille for conspiring to illegally bind a codex. The punishment for such a crime, death. All right, said Dwyer in hushed tones. "The payment. But what makes you think I would have access to that particular kind of payment?" "Do you?" asked Gaius, pushing the conversation back to the chief. Dwyer paused. He didn't even take a bite of his fish or potatoes. "That's a steep price," he finally managed to say. At this point in the conversation, Gaius felt a temptation to ask a stupid question. Most people say there is no such thing as a stupid question, but Gaius knew better than most people. The question he was dying to ask was simply this: why was the chief so interested in acquiring Percy? And then the deeper question: what was Percy? An automaton, yes, but Captain Featherton and Chief Dwyer both seemed overly eager to buy him. And the look on their faces when they first noticed the strange bird, it was almost as if all their travels across the map they had never seen another automaton like Percy. And this possibility made Gaius second-guess his plan. Perhaps he wasn't asking enough for Percy. Or perhaps he shouldn't sell Percy at all. "That's a steep price," repeated Dwyer. "I don't need an answer today," said Gaius as he stood from the table. "But I will need an answer by the time we land in Bastille." "That's only a week away," said Dwyer. Gaius didn't say another word. He simply walked out of the mess hall, leaving Chief with his thoughts. Chief would appreciate the efficiency of not wasting words, and it would make the deal feel more incomplete than it already was. There is a natural disposition in humans to tie off loose ends. By not ending the conversation properly, it gave the impression of urgency. His next stop was Captain Lily Featherton. He was looking forward to this visit. Miss Hensley had hinted that she was most amiable at tea-time, and that she often took her tea alone in her stateroom. Miss Hensley also said that she could arrange for Gaius to join the captain for tea, but only if he would tell her what Jess's favorite dessert was. Strawberry tart, of course. "Lord Q to see you, Mum," said Miss Hensley as Gaius walked through the door to the stateroom. There sat the captain, wearing a frilly pink jacket with silver epaulets and buttons over a white shirt and trousers. On the desk in front of her was an exquisite Korean tea set with a steaming pot and 2 cups both covered in painted red roses and green stems and vines, complete with thorns. One of the cups was already in the captain's hands. The other was empty and waiting for Gaius. "Thank you, Miss Hensley. You're dismissed. Lord Q, it is a pleasure, though I must say it must be difficult to drink tea with your mask on," said the captain. Gaius strode forward and sat down across from Captain Featherton. "Which is why I drink alone." He took the empty cup in front of him and turned it upside down. "Sounds awfully lonely," she mused after taking a sip of her tea. "Says the captain who drinks her tea alone," said Gaius. "There are 2 things I love above all others, beauty and solitude," said Captain Featherton. "During tea-time, I get both. Beautiful tea from beautiful teacups, and the peace and quiet to enjoy them," she said, taking another sip. "And what do you love, Lord Q?" "Freedom," he said, "and the means to ensure it." "Whatever the cost?" "Whatever the cost." "Even an old friend?" Gaius paused. The captain was far more astute than he had calculated from their first meeting. Her soft frilly exterior and accoutrements had thrown him off, as they were most likely intended to do. "You know why I'm here?" he finally asked. Captain Featherton leaned forward in her plush, red-cushioned seat and set her teacup on the desk, her eyes piercing Gaius's mask with intensity. "I can make an educated guess," she said softly. "Even with your mask you are far too easy to read, and I would advise you against asking me what you came here to ask." Gaius was tired of speaking in riddles. "Are you or are you not interested in buying Percy?" Captain Featherton stared at him for another second longer, and then leaned back in her chair. "You disappoint me," she said. I admit when we first met I was interested in Percy. Very interested, in fact. But when I offered to buy, you said, and I quote, "Percy is an old friend rather than a pet. As such, he is not to be sold or disassembled." And I respected that. But now your policy has changed. Either you were lying to me the first time, or you were easily swayed. Both show lack of character. Gaius blushed under his mask, and he gritted his teeth. "And what if I lied?" he said, much louder than he intended. "Perhaps it was a lie meant to protect. Isn't it better to lie to save someone from pain than to speak honestly and cause harm?" "No," she said quickly and assuredly. "To lie is to assume the power to twist reality to our ends, and the one who assumes that power ultimately lies to themselves and lives in shadow." Captain Featherton reached across the table and turned Gaius's teacup back over. "So why don't you take off your mask, stop living the lie, and share a cup of tea with me?" Gaius stared at her from across the desk, mouth agape and all. Then he closed his mouth, turned the cup back over, and said, "Thank you for your time, Captain." He stood and turned to leave. "Your cup will be waiting for you," she said as he reached for the door latch. Without a word, he exited the door and didn't look back.